Okay guys, so last time around I talked about the bureaucracy, or at least I sort of detailed for you what the bureaucracy, generally speaking, is. Today I'm going to get in a little more detail about the bureaucracy, what it actually consists of, and what it actually does. It's important that Americans know this so that you know who's actually governing you. Unfortunately, most Americans don't know much about the bureaucracy. This is an intense lesson, okay? And think of it as a class almost. You're gonna have to really pay attention. I'm gonna be putting a lot of slides up. You're gonna have to just follow through as I read and go through some of this information about the bureaucracy. Okay, so what is the bureaucracy? It's made up of about 6 different types of government agencies and departments. It's huge. I would suggest that you go to the link that I'm gonna put here. It's basically the US government website, and it lists all of the different agencies that exist in the federal government. And let me remind you, a lot of regulation is actually now enforced and implemented by private companies. Not just regulation, but in general. A lot of what the government does is done by private companies. If you think of private military, that is just one little aspect of privatized federal government. So there are multiple different types of executive agencies / departments. There's the Executive Office of the President. The purpose of the Executive Office of the President is to house the President's advisors and administrative support, okay? This deals with things like the federal budget, security, and other high priorities. Some examples would be the Office of Management and Budget, Office of National Drug Control Policy, or Office of the President, okay? So these are specific agencies that Congress has created to work for the president or help or assist the president. Sometimes the president has created agencies, but typically it's going to be Congress that creates an agency. Executive departments. Okay, executive departments are the main agencies of the federal government. Their leaders are the 15 members of the president's cabinet. So if you hear things like Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of this, Secretary of that, that is the cabinet. So everyone wants to know who the new president is going to appoint to be the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Treasury or Secretary of Education. Those are federal departments or executive departments. Department of Defense, Department of Education, Department of Labor are some, for example. Executive departments, sub-agencies, and bureaus. Okay, so the list of sub-agencies and bureaus on the internet is forever long. I would say there's probably 30 to 50 different ones on the website. So these are just smaller agencies that work on behalf of their parent executive department. So they're going to be under the umbrella of, say, the Department of Education. The examples could be the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Bureau of Prisons, the Food Safety and Inspection Service, National Guard, Office of the Federal Registrar, the U.S. Secret Service, the U.S. Army, the IRS. These are different parts of sub-agencies, okay? We've got independent agencies. So independent agencies are agencies of the federal government, but they're not technically part of the executive branch. They are government, but they're not technically part of the executive branch because they're self-governed and they're not directly controlled by the president. So the president has direct say and control over the executive departments and their sub-agencies. The president doesn't have as much direct control over these independent agencies. So examples for this would be the CIA, the EPA, the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Reserve System, the U.S. Postal Service. Okay, so they operate a little more independently, but they're still a federal agency, even though you're quote unquote independent. Then there's something called boards, commissions, and committees. These are organizations that Congress or the president will create. So this is not created by only Congress to deal with specific issues that don't fall under the parent agency. So if there is some issue that doesn't fall within say the Department of Education or the Department of Agriculture, then the president or Congress will create this extra board, commission, or committee that will handle issues that have to do with this particular situation. So the National Park Foundation, Endangered Species Program, Interagency Council on Homelessness. There's a vast array of different boards, commissions, and committees. Quasi-official agencies. These are agencies that are owned by the government, but they're also supposedly somewhat private powers through official agencies. They're staffed with private workers, essentially private workers with government support. So quasi-official agencies. These are agencies that are owned by the government, but they're also semi-private. They have powers like the official agencies, but they have privatized workers, okay? And this is what makes them quasi-official. They have to release some of their activities to the Federal Registrar, like all of the other agencies, but again, they have private workers. Examples include Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the Smithsonian. The bureaucracy is rather large. This is one little tiny part of it. every single department has a mass of sub-agencies under them, and those sub-agencies can have sub-agencies. And so it's this convoluted web of government. And it's this part of government that is more likely to directly affect us than any other parts of the federal government. So the Constitution doesn't really give a whole lot of detail about the bureaucratic agencies or the bureaucracy. And that's part of the reason it's probably run wild. Part of the reason it's run wild is because Congress continues to make law that the Constitution doesn't give them power to make law about. But regardless, even if they made law all within the confines of the Constitution, they would have to create these agencies to enforce the law. So the Constitution specifically says only ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the U.S. whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law were explicitly mentioned. Agencies are established by law.
Okay, so get that, guys. The bureaucracy and all of the agencies that now currently exist, which I hope you realize are very numerous. There are a ton of agencies and the bureaucracy is huge. It exists because laws are made. If you notice here, the Constitution says that they will be established by law, right? And the more law we demand, the more the bureaucracy grows. And I know this probably seems a little dry to you, but we really need to learn and understand the functioning of our government. And this is a part of government that very few people know about. And it is now being heavily constitutionally abused. I'm going to get into more details about that in the next few videos, but I needed to lay this groundwork for you guys. See, we need to know what we want and what we need. It seems today that people are demanding for more government in some areas of government, like climate change, and yet also demanding for less government by demanding that we defund the police. We need clarity about what government is supposed to do and what government actually does. And this is a start.
Well, I hope this has been helpful. Please show this to as many people as you can. People need to be educated and informed about government if they're going to make any sort of rational or reasonable decision, at least when it comes to politics. All right, guys. Thanks. Bye.